Welcome everyone to the workshop today. My name is David Bradshaw. I'm the Assistant Director of the Graduate Center, one of the co-hosts of this event. The other co-hosts are the College of Nursing, more specifically, Dr. DuPont, our facilitator today, the Graduate and Professional Student Council, and the Think Tank Writing Center. And we have had support for this program in the past by the Writing Skills Improvement Program. So big shout out to them. They were an initial co-host and facilitator of these workshops for several years and are still a great resource promoter of this event. But with that, let's go ahead and jump right on in. So this is the 6th workshop in this year's series of ABD to PhD dissertation writing workshops. We'll be focusing on sentence fluency. Dr. DuPont will talk a little more about that in a moment, but I'm really excited to have her here as our primary facilitator. She is the College of Nursing writing coach, and prior to that, she worked in the Writing Skills and Improvement Program doing a variety of things, including helping out with the ABD to PhD dissertation writing workshop series, as well as other programs and workshops they do. And now, of course, Dr. DuPont does all kinds of stuff with the College of Nursing, individual sessions, workshops over there specifically for nursing students of all levels. And we're really lucky to have her still be involved with the program. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. DuPont.
Thanks,
and
David.
For those of you online, feel free to direct message me in the chat. You're also welcome to use the raise hand function and unmute your microphone and whatnot.
Great.
Dr. DuPont, I'll let you take over.
Thanks, David. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. Thanks. First, David, thank you very much for your introduction. And it is a delight to be here. Yeah, I was in on the infancy of this workshop series. So I was just talking to a colleague of mine about how it's grown over the years. So it's been kind of fun to be a part of that. Before I go into too much, I'll just give you very brief background information and then just check in with you on a couple of housekeeping things. So I was trained in both writing and humanities. And so I've been teaching since 1989 in one capacity or another, starting out as a graduate student teacher and an adjunct faculty writing teacher and all sorts of things. And so I've definitely cut my teeth on a lot of different courses and experiences. I and other colleagues joke that, sometimes I'd like to send a letter of apology to my first 10 years of students because I was on such a learning curve, but it's been great, and it's been very rich working history. So I wanted to check with you to make sure, do you all know how to unmute your microphones? Raise your hand. Do you know how to use the raise hand function and then lower hand function, and use the chat to direct message someone? Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Most of us are probably Zoom experts at this point. So, okay. Well, as always, feel free to unmute and jump right into the conversation if you want. But I have a very loose informal style, but if you are more comfortable texting, like texting a chat message or raising your hand, that's absolutely fine. So with no further ado, would someone mind reading the University of Arizona land acknowledgement for us? Could I have one of you volunteer, and we can make sure we address pronunciation if we need be, and don't worry, about that. Don't let that keep you from reading it. It's a great reminder. Anyone want to volunteer? Anyone willing to volunteer, even if they don't want to?
I could do it.
Thanks, Erin.
We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnership, and community service.
Great. Thanks so much, Erin. Okay, so the focus of this workshop is sentence level fluency. However, I want to talk a little bit first about what fluency is in terms of writing in general, because it doesn't start at the sentence level. It starts beyond that. So I want to kind of talk with you for a few minutes about that. And then we'll look a little bit at how sentence fluency is created in writing. We'll take a look at some impediments or barriers to fluency, as well as some strategies that foster or encourage fluency in writing. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can practice sentence fluency in your writing. And again, jump in with questions at any point. Okay, so first, what is fluency? Does anyone, here I'm not talking about, I speak English and German fluently. However, there is an element of overlap between that kind of language acquisition fluency and the fluency we develop as writers with time, practice, feedback, and brainstorming and all of that. So does anyone have, like, if you had a one-word answer for what is fluency in writing, what would your answer be? Take just a moment and maybe pop that word into the chat. Okay, flow, readability. Nariko, do you want to take a stab at it? Easy to understand. Very good. Nicely done. Okay. So although any of these is part of fluency, I kind of think of it as flow too, but it's a flow that most definitely it's easy to understand, it's rhythmic, and it fosters readability. Let me look at chat too. And okay, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget anything. And that definitely has to happen on a writing level, as well as speaking and reading levels for communication to happen effectively. So thinking of fluency as flow, and that can incorporate all of the ideas that you all mentioned in the chat. We're going to move forward now. So here's what I want you to do. I haven't introduced the topic yet. So if you're wondering, well, she says the following topic, but nothing's there, that's for a reason. So I want you to take just a couple minutes, and I'll just kind of loosely time it, to write about the following topic, which I'll introduce. It's a one-word topic. I'll introduce it in just a minute. But I want you to write as you normally write when starting a first draft, as best you can. Try to replicate what you normally do when you're starting a first draft. And if you're not sure, just guess and just start writing and see what happens. Okay, so here's the topic: tigers. So just take a couple minutes just to write about tigers. Okay, you can go ahead and stop writing or typing, however you did this. And go ahead and turn your cameras back on and get ready to unmute, because we're going to do a little bit of discussion, just a quick discussion. The first thing I want you to do is some reflection. So think about the process that you took as you wrote. Okay. So just kind of think for a few seconds. What happened as you wrote? What did you do? What did you think? What actions did you take? What was easy? What was hard? And think about these discussion questions. First of all, as you wrote, what did you find yourself concentrating on the most? And I just threw out some possibilities. So could it be content, vocabulary, grammar, a mixture of those, something else? So if you'd like to unmute, and if you see me dragging my mouse across the board, that's I'm moving our Zoom images back and forth. So go ahead and unmute and just kind of share a couple of thoughts. And there's no right or wrong to this. And if you're struggling to figure out how to answer it, don't worry about that. There's no right or wrong.
This is Sherry. I'm happy to go first.
Great. Thanks, Sherry.
So for me, so I'm also a creative writer. So at the beginning, I kind of struggled on how to approach the writing because I don't know much about it, but then I was thinking, well, this is an academic process, so I think I need to write academically. And so then I was thinking, I don't know much about tigers, so how do I approach it with a style? So then my next thought went into, okay, how can I find a common point or an interest point that would lead into me talking about tigers or writing about tigers? So it took me quite a while to actually start writing. And then once I did, it was more tying my thoughts together. So content more so than vocabulary or grammar.
Great. Okay, thanks so much for starting the ball rolling, Sherry. Yes, and you described an interesting process, and I was going to ask, what happened with the words? How many words did you get out? And so I'm assuming not like a sentence or two, maybe, and that, which is fine. Again, there's no right or wrong. Kamala, Noriko, or Erin, how about you?
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
This is Erin. I felt the time pressure, so I kind of started writing without knowing exactly where I was going, which actually kind of reflects usually how writing an academic paper goes.
Perfect.
So the first part is a little incoherent, and then it kind of led into a more interesting, coherent topic about tigers. But it, like most of my drafts, they're exercises in thinking first and foremost, and then it goes back to content. Then it goes back to grammar and vocabulary. But I try to not get too caught up, but I still find myself wanting good vocabulary or to express myself along the way. So a mix of everything.
Great. Thank you so much. You guys are bringing up important points that we're going to address, and that's wonderful. So, Noriko, how about you? As you were writing, or as you were approaching this writing, what were you thinking about the most? What was your process like?
So for me, everything, I'm sorry with everything, so content and the vocabulary grammar, because the English is a second language for me. And the first I noticed the topic is tiger, but what topic in tiger should I write up? And I don't have enough knowledge to write up, so I looked up the tiger, and then I was thinking of a structure, but so.
Yeah. So that's great, Noriko. And so in terms of how much writing you ended up with, again, about how much, how many sentences did you end up with? Like 2 or?
Just one sentence.
Good. Okay, that's kind of what I was figuring. No, that's perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then Kamaile, do you want to bring us in, wrap us up? You might have gotten in a bit late.
Yeah,
There
sorry,
you are.
I came a bit late, and I'm still like arguing with all of my devices. My camera's not working, and I just got my
No
sound
worries.
connected, so
Okay.
I was just listening to the discussion kind of, but I didn't actually do the writing yet.
Okay,
But I
no
would probably
worries.
have written questions if I'm honest.
Okay, so we're going to kind of circle back to this idea of what can happen when we are normally starting to write and how we can get in our own way, right? And Noriko, you brought up a really important point that is something a lot of us think about either when English is an alternative language for us, right? It's not the first language we spoke and learned, but also even if English was our first language, if we're learning the language of a discipline, or we're growing in terms of sophistication, like now we're in a doctoral program and the language in that program or the way we have to express ourselves is very different from how we might have done it, say, as an undergraduate student. So there are some things that can sometimes happen that can interfere with fluency or flow. And so we'll circle back to this, but now I'm going to move you on again to take a couple minutes and write about tigers again. And this time, focus only on writing down your ideas and don't worry at all. Don't think at all about vocabulary or grammar. And I know easier said than done. So if you can't think of a word, either leave a blank space, draw a picture, or substitute a word from a language other than English. Whatever it takes to keep the flow of the idea going, because we're concerned with just getting ideas out. Okay, so I'll put the timer on again and go ahead and now just focus only on ideas. Don't think too much about them. Just try to write without stopping about tigers. Okay, you can go ahead and put your pen down or stop typing and turn your camera on. Or just be ready to jump in if your camera's still not working. Okay, so first of all, before we go into a little bit of discussion, you'll notice a couple of things that we did differently. First of all, I said, now take a couple minutes and write about tigers again. So one, the topic was no longer new. We had spoken about it a little bit. This is kind of a fakey situation. So I understand it's not totally reflecting, like starting a first draft of a scholarly paper, but some of the same issues you all mentioned, issues that come up in that process. Having a little bit of time to kind of consider a topic, or maybe, if you were doing some literature searching, maybe doing a quick scan of things to get a general broad overview, and then doing a deeper dive to get a sense of themes or patterns you want to address. So that was the first thing. The topic wasn't brand new. And the second thing was a request to focus only on ideas and not worry about how beautiful they are. So, all those grammatical points, especially vocabulary, grammar, accuracy, it assaults us when English or any language that we're writing, it is not our first language. We're still learning, English language learners or other language learners. And so those worries can really weigh us down. And so giving yourself permission, that was the second thing, give yourself permission not to fret over those. And then third, keep some strategies in the back of your mind for when and if those worries come up. Just leave a blank space if you can't think of a word, or draw a picture, or substitute a word from another language that you're more familiar with, just to get anything that you need to remember what you're trying to say, and then move on. Okay, so those were 3 differences. And so in reflection, again, same first step. Think about the process you took as you wrote. And again, there's no magic answer, no right or wrong answer. And then what was different for you between both writing experiences? So let's hear from 1 or 2 of you on that. Can someone jump in? Sherry?
Sure. So this was much more close to what I normally do. I tend to start writing with just get it out and then make it pretty later. So for me, it flowed much more easily to just get ideas out. And I have 3 times the word count this time than I did the first time around. So
good point. Very good point. And someone else, one of the, is it okay, Noriko, if I call on you to see whether, and it's okay if you didn't have a difference, but if you could talk with us a little bit about your process, your experience?
Sure. So this time, right?
Yes, this time. What was different for you between the 2 writing experiences, this time and the last one?
Yeah. So this time I don't so much pressure because I don't need to sentence. So just come up the idea with the topics. And then first I try to make the structure. How structure should I do? So the first the broad topics and then narrow topics. And then, just I put the idea, but not yet make good structure, but something.
Good, great. And Noriko too, one thing, you are working with 2 very challenging languages at an advanced, sophisticated level. So don't ever discount that. Those of us who grow up speaking English in an English-speaking country often don't learn any other languages very well. And so to be able to converse and communicate into especially 2 very challenging languages is phenomenal. So it's important for all of you who work in multiple languages to remember that. And for all of you to remember that even going through the transition to a different form of English. So any similarities between both writing experiences? Let's just hear from one of you, and then we're going to move along. And it's
I'm happy.
Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Sure. I actually had a fairly similar experience between both, although I did feel a certain feeling of guilt when I was like, ooh, what's the word I would like to use here? Trying to think of the vocabulary. But I sometimes think that's necessary to carry the ideas too. I love the idea of using a picture or a symbol. I often use that with my citations when I go, oh, I know someone said this, but I can't remember who, put it in stars, come back to it. But I hadn't thought about that in terms of, using that in sentence structure or for vocabulary that I'm struggling for. So that I think will be useful moving forward.
Good, good. Great. Okay, thank you all very much. So I wasn't necessarily looking for a specific pattern, but what I did hear was there seemed to be more of a flow. And that's when you, in this second part, and I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we move forward, what helped that flow. So qualities of sentence fluency, I'm just going to talk a little bit about these. One was covered in the previous workshop, and that's clarity. Of course, you know, the clearer you communicate, the more fluid your writing is going to be for both you and your reader. A lot of times clarity on a sentence level will come late in the revision process, and that's fine, because you first want to make sure your ideas are organized and developed and prioritized appropriately. Other qualities of sentence fluency include smooth flow and effective transitions, and these are today's focuses. So we're going to narrow to effective transitions in a little bit, because that's more sentence level. But there are other determinants of that overall smooth flow that I want to get into a little bit. And by the way, a PDF of this document will be available to you. So it's perfectly fine if you're, and may actually, David, if you feel like popping that into the chat now, if you guys think it'd be helpful to take notes on, I'm fine with you doing that if you'd like to. So next question is, how is sentence fluency created in writing? All right, the first thing is there are things that promote fluency and things that interfere with it. So some of the things that interfere with fluency and are very common to graduate school, undergraduate school, academia in general, last minute exploration and reflection. Several of you mentioned that you either had to stop and do a little bit of searching on tigers, or you had to really think about tigers, reflect on that. What do I know about them? I don't know that much. Is there a point I want to make and a thread I want to find? So when you don't have enough time to do that, your writing can be shut down because you're not able to generate enough, even in the way of basic ideas that you can later develop. Here's another one, and you mentioned this too, editing while you write. And when you're concerned with things like grammar accuracy, vocabulary, spelling, format, that's editing while you write. And the problem is, when you are generating ideas, that part of writing, that sort of drafting part, you want to just allow yourself to focus on that. And you will. Erin, you mentioned the word guilt. You might feel guilt at times because it's like, it's not pretty at all. It's ugly. And you might feel some anxiety about that. So remind yourself, wait a minute. This draft is just for me. I'm not turning this in. I'm not even handing it in for peer evaluation. I'll do at least some minor proofreading or something before I do that. So I can be as messy as I want. You know, I can write incomplete sentences if I want. So kind of bringing yourself back down to earth and centering in that idea of, I don't need to edit my sentences while I write. I just need to generate whatever ideas come to mind. Last minute drafting. So that kind of goes with last minute exploration and reflection. If you sit down and start drafting a first draft, start that initial writing, again, the anxiety in that, or the fact that you really don't have a lot of time to play around with any of the ideas or think or reflect again, or you just run out of time and you can only write half of what you need. all of that interferes with fluency. Another thing is that it doesn't give you much chance for revising. Most writing improvement and writing in general happens during the revision process. And how often are we really trained or shown or have that modeled to us? Not very often. Revising in one setting, that can interfere with fluency because we're trying to focus on everything at the same time. Organization, content, do I have enough? Am I missing enough? Is this organized? Well, and then wait a minute, am I using the right word? And is it formatted in APA or AMA or MLA or, you know? So what happens is if you're trying to think of all of that at the same time, you can't. Your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. So what happens is you get the sort of piecemeal where, you know, in some places you might have focused on how organized your ideas are and connecting ideas. But in another place, you might have forgotten that and just focused on content. But because you didn't focus on organization first all the way through, you might have missed the fact that while it wasn't completely organized, you did have some content related to a topic further along, which you could have moved up, and then you would have seen whether you needed to develop it and blah, blah, blah. So you want to get a lot of the organization and content revision work done before you really focus in depth on sentence level revision. That doesn't mean you do each one only once. This is a circular, revision is a circular process. You come back, iterative, you come back and you do it again, but you still focus on things one at a time. And then formatting, final proofreading checks of final little minor errors that you might have missed. Okay, they're all separate parts of the process. And again, lack of sentence level clarity, that definitely can interfere with fluency if there's, you know, wordiness, redundancy, ineffective word choices that haven't, you know, and if you're not sure, ask someone. It's perfectly fine. So what promotes fluency? Well, you'll see that there are some correlations. Giving yourself time to explore and reflect. Thinking about a topic, doing some literature searching and reviewing, you know, the abstracts of a few articles and thinking, okay, I might want to take a deeper dive into this. So I'll take a look at the introduction and maybe some of the findings and conclusion first to get a sense of what, you know, what they found. And if that helps me understand my topic from a new angle or a broader perspective. And then if I want to take a deeper dive into various other sections in the article, I can. Another thing that promotes fluency is brainstorming. Giving yourself time to just free write, to jot down in, you know, ideas as phrases, to roughly outline ideas, to talk them out, to draw them out, to use clusters and mind maps and, you know, all sorts of, you know, there's so many ways in which you can brainstorm, diagramming ideas. But the main thing is you're giving your brain a chance to look at relationships among ideas, experiment with them, and kind of get some cognitive space and some time to really let some things soak in. Revising in stages. So, you know, separating out, you know, maybe starting with organization and pulling related ideas together and then moving on to content and so forth. Transitions. Transitions can happen between ideas, moving from one idea to the next. They can even headings, subheadings in a paper can help you transition. You know, sentences, the first sentence of a paragraph or of a section can create a transition, can signal to your readers. The last sentence or paragraph of a section can signal important information. All of that helps. On a sentence level, there are words and phrases and ways of punctuating them and combining them that can help you with transitions. And I'll go into that. That's really kind of what we'll start narrowing down to. And that brings us to these sentence level strategies. Again, clarity was covered in the previous workshop, but transitional devices and the placement of old and new information. Okay, some of this will be refresher from the previous workshop on clarity. I'll take you through, and then some of it will be new. So any questions before I move on? Or do you need to stop? Do you need to take a quick break or anything? Pardon, that's my neighbor's dog, Angel, barking. She wants to join in too. She says, I have a lot of things to teach about transitions. Okay. So so the promoters, the things that promote sentence level fluency, that foster it. Clauses and phrases. Notice I didn't put independent and dependent. I wanted you to think of the concepts of independence and dependence. A clause always contains a subject and a verb, grammatical subject and verb, but it doesn't always stand alone or independently as a sentence. Depending on how it's phrased, it might be subordinate or dependent on another clause to complete the idea in a grammatically whole and complete sentence. A phrase always falls within the dependence category or conceptual category because it's always missing at least a subject or a verb, often both. It's extra bits of information that help tie ideas together or give us some details that we need, but grammatically, it's not a complete sentence ever. Okay, so using these in different ways can help promote fluency. Punctuation with combining clauses and phrases, with using transitional words. That can be especially semicolons and commas. That those two punctuation marks are used a lot with various forms of sentence combining. Colons are too. Colons, the two dots, those are awesome. But I could teach a whole workshop on colons. And so I'm not going to cover them tonight, but colons are phenomenal tools, and learning how to use a colon effectively really can help you cut down wordiness and redundancy, tighten your ideas, and pull those relationships together more cohesively. Transition words, conjunctive adverbs. You don't have to remember this label, but what I mean by those are words like however, therefore, nevertheless, thus, and so forth, that start a new idea, but it's connected in some way with the previous or following idea in the same sentence or between two sentences. The conjunctions, the fanboys, and I'll review those in just a minute, like and then relative pronouns. Again, don't worry about the terminology, but those are words like which and that. Which and that are really helpful for combining ideas on a sentence level. Prepositions also help establish important relationships, and they often can set up subordination. Like if you use although or because, you can consider that a preposition, but it's not setting up like it's not setting up an independent clause. It's setting up a dependence. And then placement of old and new content for flow. That can relate to clarity and flow. And so I'll just cover that just briefly. Okay, so let's do a quick little activity. I want you to pull up a piece of your writing, and you can grab a piece of academic writing, since that's probably where you'll be applying a lot of this in the immediate future. Can be any draft of a paper you've been working on. Okay, or that you're still working on. It can be an old draft from an old course. So don't spend a lot of time agonizing over it, because all I want you to do is pull up any piece of your writing and pick a random paragraph. So give me a little thumbs up or wave of the hand or whatever to let me know once you've chosen a paragraph. And okay, Sherry, great. So take about as much time as Sherry took. Don't take a lot of time to agonize. Erin, okay, great. So Noriko and Kamale. Okay, Noriko, I saw you nod. Okay, and then, okay, great. All right. So what I want you to do is just pick a random paragraph and just read it to yourself slowly. You don't have to read it aloud, although that can be very helpful at times. Just read it slowly, and don't worry about number 3 yet. First, read it slowly without any agenda. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you may have finished or you're close to finishing reading that paragraph. So now I want you to look at it again and just ask yourself these questions. Did you notice any spots that seem to be missing something, even if you're not sure what? And it's okay if you didn't. Did you notice any ideas or phrases that seem like disconnected or misplaced? Again, no worries either way. Did you notice any sudden, unexpected jumps between ideas? If you've heard the term choppy or choppiness, that's what that's referring to. Or did you notice any passages that just don't seem to belong in this paragraph? They might belong somewhere in the paper, but they don't seem to belong in this paragraph. So take a minute. I'm gonna close my door a little bit because I know there's voices in the background. And take a minute to just think about these questions. As you're thinking about these questions, has anything occurred to you, or if nothing, if you can't relate to any of that in this paragraph, did it trigger a memory of another piece of writing where any of these patterns seemed to come up? Does anyone want to jump in for a moment?
Leslie, I'll make a comment. I'm
Sure.
struggling a little bit with the questions. The paragraph I picked is definitely an early draft, so it's not the most readable of my writing. And I think one of the problems is they're very condensed. The ideas are, so perhaps that fits with choppiness a little bit, that I'm having trouble myself. I know what the ideas pertain to, but I think as a reader, it would be very difficult. And I think I may have sent this to my advisor, so I feel kind of bad about that. But there's certainly, it's hard to say if anything's misplaced exactly. It's just not fleshed out. It's more of a skeleton. So maybe missing something and a bit choppy.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, that's perfect, because early drafts obviously are going to have issues. There's no way to avoid it because it's an early draft, and it's not expected that it would be absolutely complete and flowing. But yeah, what you also described, Erin, is that you had a chance to kind of reflect back on something that you may have sent to someone. And two things are happening, right? One, you're suddenly thinking about an audience other than yourself. It's like, oh crap, I sent this to somebody. But the important thing is, discard the shame and guilt and all of that. The important thing is that it suddenly makes you aware of your writing in a different way, and thinking about it from the reader's perspective is like, oh, as a reader, what would I need from this? Maybe this is a great idea, but maybe I need it fleshed out. Maybe I need to know what some of the perspectives are on this idea. maybe I need to get a definition, a more fleshed out definition of this concept, or see how it might be applied in my field that I'm reading about or whatever. You know, so, or maybe there's two really cool ideas, but they're in the same paragraph. And so it kind of threw me because I thought it was focusing on one thing and then something else popped in. Oh, maybe I could separate those out and then develop each from there. Good. Okay. Would anyone else like to just pop in with any, you know, ideas, anything you noticed or that it made you think about, these questions made you think about in other pieces of writing? Could we hear from one more of you?
I am a little confused about, or maybe it just doesn't bring to mind anything from other writing necessarily at the moment, but in this particular writing, I noticed that I made kind of a logical leap between like explaining, it's kind of hard to explain without just explaining it, but basically I was talking about the ways that this set of laws that Hawaiian chief changed, and then it was really influenced by Christian missionaries who were present at the time, and they were really concerned about Hawaiian family relations, and so the laws reflected, you know, Christian ideas of church ritualized marriage and enforced monogamy and these kinds of things. And then at the end, you know, I kind of summed it up with like, this shows how this initiated a transition into a legal system based on Western principles and Christian morality. But I realized that at no point in this paragraph or even anywhere before, this is kind of the first time I'm talking about how the Christian missionaries were specifically targeting Hawaiian family structures in the initial sets of laws that they were using to try to like assimilate Hawaiians. But I didn't actually ever explain like what the Hawaiian family practices were that they were so obsessed about, and why it kind of like would make sense that that this type of law is different from what existed before and would be very foreign to and confusing to Hawaiians. And that would, you know, actually complete the thought about how this is initiating an actual change, a transition in the legal system and a transition in the moral system, because I just didn't even tell people, the reader, you know, I'm writing from a Hawaiian and I'm kind of writing to Hawaiians, but you know, if the reader is non-Hawaiian, they might not know that like there were other practices, and that is why this law, why it actually signifies some sort of change, some sort of legal and moral change from an old way to a new way. So yeah, the question basically, is it missing something? Yeah, yeah, it is.
Awesome. That is awesome. I love that kind of reflection on your experience. And yes, that makes perfect sense. So that doesn't reflect any confusion at all. And it's, you know, you clearly showed, and a lot of times this is what we'll discover if we give ourselves enough time. But imagine if you're trying to write at the last minute and then you have to turn it in, and then you get a grade back on it that you're not happy with. But if you have time to think about it, it's like, oh, now I know why. So you're able to do this beforehand, and it's like, oh yeah, this whole huge idea of Hawaiian family customs before the onset or arrival of Christian missionaries and Christianization isn't present yet. And so, thinking from my reader's perspective, they'll be saying, what is it? What was changed? So you said that beautifully. Excellent. And this is what you can do. And this is sort of fluency in terms of the overall ideas that are connected and developed. And this kind of fluency is important to get you to more localized sentence level fluency. Great. Thank you both for sharing. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of refresher from the Clarity workshop. And some of this I covered already. So a clause always contains both the subject and the verb, and this sort of this container of towels. And an independent clause is a whole complete sentence in one package. A dependent clause will always contain a subject and verb, but it also contains a word or a phrase that, like, although pigeons fly in all countries, or whatever, although pigeons live in all countries, you can't put a period at the end of that and have a complete sentence because of the word although. So you've got a container in terms of subject and verb, but really it won't hold together as a complete sentence. And this is also true of a phrase. So that's just a quick refresher. And that visual may or may not be helpful. That's all right. So clauses create sentence types. So if you cast your brain back into the dim history of middle schoolish kind of education, do you remember things like a simple sentence, a compound sentence, a complex sentence? Do you remember that terminology? Even if you don't have any idea anymore what the heck they mean and you're not even sure you knew then. Okay. So kind of cast your brains back a little bit, cast back in your memories, and let's just kind of quick refresh on that. So a simple sentence is basically just an independent clause. It might have extra information like adjectives, things like that, but it's basically a straight independent clause with no dependent clauses, no althoughs, or because this was the case, blah, blah, blah. An example, recent research supports Hill's argument. Boom, done. Okay. A compound sentence is two or more independent clauses. So if you put a period at the end of each one of them and remove the connecting devices, they would stand alone as each one as a sentence. But there are no dependent clauses in that. So here's an example. Recent research supports Hill's argument. And then here we have a connector of a comma and a conjunction, but, and then another independent clause. The case remains controversial. So we could technically put a period at the end of argument as well as controversial and leave out but and the comma. It would be very choppy on a sentence level, but grammatically, they'd be complete ideas. And finally, a complex sentence, one or more independent and dependent clauses. So the dependent clause is created with the word although. Although recent research supports Hill's argument, comma, the case remains controversial. So the case remains controversial is a complete independent clause sentence, but the word although turns the first clause. We've got research support, so we got a grammatical subject and verb, but the word although makes this whole idea dependent on a finisher, another idea that finishes that thought. Okay, does that make sense on a basic level? Don't worry about, I'm not expecting you to memorize all this. I just want you aware of it, and then knowing that you can come back to this PDF, this PowerPoint as a PDF, and take a look at just a refresher, remind yourself of these, and then maybe experiment a little bit, choose a passage or so and see if you can play around with pulling ideas together using these different sentence level structures. Okay. So you connect clauses with punctuation in different ways. So you can add a semicolon or a comma to connect two independent clauses. The semicolon is between two independent clauses joined by a conjunctive adverb. And again, if your mind is going, what? Here are three examples of conjunctive adverbs, just to give you. And if you look up online lists of conjunctive adverbs, lists of transitional words, things like that, lists of prepositions, another kind of connecting word, you'll find a lot of cool lists, and you can download them, or one or two of them, and so you can refer to them. After the conjunctive adverb joining these two independent clauses, you put a comma. So here's an example. Thus is the conjunctive adverb, semicolon before it, comma after it. Because while it's connecting, it's also creating a little break and transitioning from one idea or one aspect of an idea to another. My aunt has been divorced 15 times. Thus, she has 14 dogs. So she adopts a dog every time she gets divorced, I guess. Okay, the next punctuation connector, a conjunction, and we'll look at specific conjunctions again in a minute, but a comma goes before a conjunction that joins two independent clauses. So you don't have to throw in a comma every time you see but or and, right? You use it for different purposes, one of which is if the conjunction is being used to join two independent clauses. My aunt has been divorced 15 times, comma, but she has 14 dogs. So the meaning changes a little bit too. The type of connecting device can alter the meaning either a little bit or dramatically. And then a complete sentence, you can put a period at the end of. But if you have a whole bunch of complete sentences with periods, it starts to sound choppy again. My aunt has been divorced 15 times. Boom, done. But if you then followed it with, she has 14 dogs. Boom, done. Both of those sentences are grammatically complete, but they're not pretty. There's no flow. It's just ba-dump, ba-dump. So it's kind of like da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, like a machine gun going off or something. It's probably not the best analogy, but it's not there. It's there, but it's not pretty. Okay, so this is why playing around with different ways to throw sentences and ideas together can help you smooth out the flow. Any questions about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm understanding the different kinds of sentences, and I believe the implication is that you want to use these in a variation of ways, right? To make our closet metaphor.
My subtext.
Here. Right.
Yes.
So to have our simple, and then you have a few, maybe you have two simple sentences and then you throw in a complex one to kind of, and I guess I understand this intellectually, but I don't quite understand, like, is there a nice formula to help us? Like, two simple, one complex, one compound, two simple. I mean, I understand that sounds a bit silly.
No, it doesn't. I get it. And in fact, thank you for bringing us back to the organized closet metaphor, because I totally zipped right over that. And yeah, you're right. It's like, how are these elements held together? And so you touched on that beautifully. I think, well, obviously there isn't a mathematical formula, although you can find one if you want to try one out and say, all right, I'm going to challenge myself in this paragraph to do 2 compound sentences, at least 2 compound sentences. So how can I combine some of the points I'm making in this paragraph? But what you can do always is read aloud or have someone read aloud to you. Now, if you were in the College of Nursing, I would say, join me in a writing coaching session and I'll make you read aloud. I'll say, all right, take this paragraph and read it aloud. What did you hear? And initially you might not hear much of anything, but as we start talking and identifying patterns, or as you start validating the places where you're reading aloud and then you pause or stumble, but you're not sure why, you'll realize you are starting to pick things up. So reading aloud, while it might feel bizarre or awkward, is very important for helping us put ourselves in the shoes of our audience, of our readers. Okay. So we're moving beyond ourselves as an audience. So I think it's really important in that respect. So while that's not a formula as in do 2 of these, 1 of these, and divide them by 1 of those, it gives you a starting point. What you want to look for also is another part of this formula can be look for conjunctive adverbs, right? Look for conjunctions, and then look for simple sentences just ended by periods. How many of each one? Like maybe count. Take a page or 2 and just count. Refresh your memory on what a simple sentence is and see if you can identify simple sentences. Refresh your memory on what a compound sentence is and do the same, and the same with complex sentences. Play around with it. Then look at punctuation. If you're connecting 2 clauses with a conjunctive adverb, are you preceding it appropriately with a semicolon or a period and following it with a comma? Even something as simple as that, because sometimes we might throw in a comma, but create what we call a comma splice, because we're using it to hold together 2 independent clauses without any other connectors. And that's what a comma splice is. It's not enough. The reader skips over it too quickly and that gets confusing. So I don't know, Erin, did that at least give you some things to think about in answer to your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sure. Great question. Okay. So when combining goes wrong, I won't belabor this, but here's where we talk about some of these missing or inaccurate punctuation. So like I said, comma splices, or maybe a period or semicolon is missing, or trying to incorporate too many ideas in one sentence. So let's look at an example of each one of these. Both of these examples have punctuation that isn't used really effectively. The first one is a comma splice, because basically you're just using a comma to join 2 independent clauses. So again, your reader isn't getting enough of a signal to slow down and start a new related point or idea. This second sentence has no punctuation at all, and it's crammed with different ideas. So it kind of creates both of those, or commits both of those crimes. So, which we all do when we're drafting. So don't worry. Just these are patterns to look for when you're revising at various stages. So there is a natural interest in comparing newly developed measurement methods to those commonly used. There are also a variety of approaches used. So the comma doesn't slow us down enough. Even if you just popped a semicolon in here, which is another way to create a compound sentence without a conjunctive adverb and comma, that's fine. So in some cases, you can just pop a semicolon in, and that will slow your readers down enough to capture more of the overall idea. Okay, now let's read this next one, my favorite. Current methods undermine communities. As we know, each community is different, and understanding their unique activities in relation to potential exposures is key when conducting relevant risk assessment. What? So initially, I always read communities as we know, and then I see each community. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, what? So something must go here, right? But then we come to each community is different and understanding, but then we get their unique what? Wait, what? So again, we need something here, a comma maybe, to signal these 2 independent ideas. So current methods undermine communities. period. We can try that. That might be a good spot for just a plain old simple sentence. As we know, comma, we've got this nice phrase kind of introducing, creating a transition too. Each community, well, actually, that's a dependent clause because there's a subject and a verb. So as we know, comma, each community is different, comma, and, so comma conjunction, understanding their unique activities in relation to potential exposures is key when conducting relevant risk assessment. So just adding 2 or 3 bits of punctuation changes the meaning so drastically that, and your reader can kind of follow along with the flow. So these can be, it's patterns that can interrupt flow also, and clarity, obviously. Some of this, again, is refresher. So transitions, so important to flow. I just simply define a transition as a connecting point. It can be an idea, moving from one idea to another one, how one idea is concluded and another one introduced, and the order in which they're brought up. Structural elements, even like section headings, right? Subheadings. Words and phrases, and we're really going to focus on words and phrases. We're going to continue with that focus mostly in this workshop. So let's look at some transitional words and how they help clauses or ideas relate to one another. Grammatically, how they help dependent and independent clauses relate, or in terms of meaning, how they help ideas relate. Okay, so what I've got is examples in the purple of the type of transition word, and then what it shows, and then another type of transition word. These are the fanboys, the conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, spells fanboys. And that's a way to remember them. And then what they show, there are dependent clause markers like prepositions. And so here are some examples: because, since, if, although, even though, okay, despite, whatever. So this is what they show, like because might show a cause or create a consequence. Although or even though, despite the fact that of this one thing, something else is also true, or whatever. Here are 2 words that will become your best friends as you keep practicing: which and that. Which is what's called a non-defining relative pronoun. It provides extra information and it can't be replaced with that. The data, comma, which was collected incorrectly, comma, is useless. So grammatically, if you just wrote the data is useless, you'd have a complete idea, a complete sentence. So that's what we mean by non-defining, which isn't defining the grammatical setup, structural setup of the whole idea. But it is introducing extra information, which was collected incorrectly. That is what's called a defining relative pronoun. By defining, we mean only the specific noun or idea that refers to. It's defined by that clause that begins with the relative pronoun that. And I'm using that so much in my sentence that might be confusing. The data that was collected incorrectly is useless. So it's this specific data that was collected incorrectly is what's being defined here. It also suggests that there might have been other data that was collected correctly and could be useful. So say we're looking at a whole data set or several data sets, and where in a study that we're conducting and the team is looking at it and going, wait a minute, what's going on with this analysis? And finally we realized, oh, darn it, some of the data wasn't collected incorrectly, or a bias wasn't accounted for, or an important bit of information was left out and not collected. So that particular data, the data that was collected incorrectly, is useless. So in this case, you could substitute which, the data which was collected incorrectly is useless. But here, you can't substitute that. The data, comma, that was collected incorrectly, comma. You can't, that's not grammatically accurate. You have to use which or who if it's like a person or a living being that you ascribe a who to. Okay. I'm not expecting, again, you to memorize this, but what you can do is, again, keep this chart handy in the PDF we provide you with and refer to it to refresh your memory. Any questions about any of these before we move on? Okay. So let's try it out. Again, let's look at a paragraph of your own writing. You can look at the same paragraph if you want, or just a different one. You know, it can be in the same piece of writing. Don't take more than a few seconds to select it. And I'll do a quick time check. So we're actually moving along well. That's good. So the first thing I want you to do in this paragraph is just identify transition words. Here, I give you an example of conjunctive adverbs, relative pronouns, and more conjunctive adverbs, but there might also be conjunctions like the fanboys, or prepositions that like besides, or, you know, something like that. Besides this, also this. So just kind of identify, maybe if you're looking in Word, use a highlighter to highlight any transition words. And don't worry about the questions yet. Okay, I'm assuming that you've identified at least a couple transition words in a paragraph. So now it's time to ask yourself these questions. Are the transition words signaling the appropriate relationship between the ideas of the sentence? And you can think about, again, I'm not again expecting you to remember, but you might, when you're on your own, refer to this chart and thinking, is it signaling what I want it to signal? Am I using however when I really mean moreover, for instance? Am I using for when I really mean but or, and so forth? So you want to be thinking, not only are you using these transition words, but are they signaling the appropriate relationship? Prepositions can be another big one, right? Especially if English is not your first language, but even if it is, it can be hard sometimes to figure out what the best preposition is. And sometimes the more we think about it, the harder it gets to figure that out. Okay. So another question might seem bizarre, but is it worth the extra words to convey the summative or the main point, the summative idea to your reader? So you've added some transition words or maybe phrases. Are they doing the job they need to do? Or like with prepositions, especially, do you really need them? Or can you do a little bit of rephrasing maybe? And that kind of relates to clarity too, to kind of reduce wordiness or whatever and improve the flow. And then finally, another question you could ask is, at any of these transitional points, what would happen if you split this sentence into two sentences? If you put a period at the end of each independent clause or each clause, would it improve or not? Would it separate two ideas that really need to stand on their own? Or would it create that choppiness of, here's a sentence, here's a sentence, here's a, that grocery list again of sentences. Or would you be making a dependent clause stand alone and not fulfill the role of a sentence, creating a fragment? And you can have a sentence fragment that's 2 lines long. If it's a dependent clause, then it's still a fragment. So take a minute and just see, and you can ask too, if you're not sure, like you're using a certain word in a certain sentence, maybe pop that sentence into chat and we can take a look at it. Okay, so let's kind of take this one point at a time. First of all, and you can do a thumbs up if your camera's off, or just turn your camera back on and nod or whatever. But did you find at least one transition word in your paragraph? Okay, so we got 2 nods and a thumbs up. And then Sherry and Kamale? Okay, a thumbs up. And okay, so there's 3 anyway. And so did they signal the appropriate relationships or between ideas, or are you not sure, or no? And did you get an idea for a different word you might want to do? Does anyone want to speak to that? Go for it, Erin.
I'd be happy to comment. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think what I found was helpful in identifying the transition words was how complicated, and in some ways contradictory some of my clauses were.
Nice.
Still are. I haven't adapted them yet, but like the sentence may be irredeemable.
Irredeemable.
Irredeemable, thank you. Beyond redemption.
Beyond redemption.
But maybe just by identifying those, I could see that the sentence was kind of catastrophic, needed to be broken into a couple different spaces. But
yeah,
I'm not can sum it up as one word. It just, there's some serious help that it identified dysfunctional space. So
awesome.
That's helpful.
That's great. And so immediately you notice some things that you want to come back and take a closer look at. And I think highlighting these kinds of transitional words is so important for that purpose. The other thing is, and I didn't put it here, but did any of you notice spots that seemed abrupt? The shift was abrupt, and we'll get to that, but kind of keep that in mind too. Were there places that could have used transitional words? So kind of keep that in the back of your mind too. Good.
So there was a comment in chat that one person didn't find any transition words and found it potentially strange.
That there were no
transition. Wanted to comment on that or not?
Yeah. So I didn't find any, and I'm still looking. LOL. Okay. I find it kind of strange. I'm assuming, Kamila, that you mean you found it kind of strange that there weren't any. But go for it.
I would find that I don't know if they're transition words. I don't know what word I'm thinking of, or words that I'm thinking of that are usually, I'll say this, I use dependent clauses at the beginning of my sentences a lot. And that's something that I noticed I think it was in a prior workshop, in the paragraph that I was looking at, it was like 3/4 of the sentences started with a dependent clause. So like during, throughout, like almost like, I guess, time, like I'm starting with time phrases, but I'm writing a historical kind of like section that's just kind of like bam, 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 going through all the different history points. But I find that I'm just like, basically like at this time, in this year, during this time, throughout this period, like, and it's just like every single sentence kind of sounds like that. And it's almost like, like really repetitive. But I did end up finding one, and it was however, and I do think that it is just describing the correct relationship, except for, again, I found that I didn't quite identify first the thing that I was showing was different. So I was talking about those laws that I was mentioning before, and about how, like, throughout the next 20 years, the courts were full of this particular type of case, this fornication, like adultery type of case. And then the sentence was, however, as other ethnic groups started immigrating and settling in Hawaii, they were not like equivalently charged with this type of case. And then the following sentence was kind of summing up that, you know, this was really only used against Hawaiians specifically. But I didn't actually say, when I said the courts were filling up with these cases, I didn't say in that sentence against Hawaiians, which would make the however make more sense. However, like, even though other ethnicities were coming in, they were actually not being charged with this. It just kept remaining. I don't know, maybe however isn't, now that I'm thinking about it, like thinking more about it, like maybe it's something else. That's it's showing a distinction, but it's not like, however,
it's
I don't
not
know.
a contrast.
Maybe,
play around with it. I think that's fabulous. 2 points I want to speak to. One is the during this, or furthermore, or not furthermore, during this time, at this time, you were mentioning, you can consider those transitional devices. Those are prepositional phrases, preposition like during or at, which are situating things in time, and they are creating transitions. If you find that they're helping the flow through time for your readers, that's fine. They're working, they're doing their job. If you find that there's too much, it feels like there's too much of that, then you can think about, okay, either am I overanalyzing this and maybe it's fine. So maybe have someone else read one passage and just don't say anything. Just say, what do you think of the way this flows? And if they go, what? Just read it and let me know. And then, or it could be that you might be able to restructure some of the sentences, like you were saying, you found however, or, and you can then think about, okay, is this conjunctive adverb, like however, you doing what it needs to do, or is this really a on the other hand kind of thing, or kind of a contrasty kind of thing, or another point to consider, or would another word be, like, would a cause effect word be more appropriate, or whatever. Okay, good. No, that was both of those were very helpful. So anyone want to speak to any other of the questions? Like, is it worth, actually, Kamale, you did speak a little bit to, is it worth the extra words to convey the sort of main idea point to your reader? So it sounds a bit like you might have been asking yourself that in an indirect way of, do I need all of these phrases? And you might, like you say, you're creating a historical context and you're helping your reader map the path, follow the path. But are there places where, could I phrase it differently? Or, do I really need all those words? So good. But anyone else want to speak to either of those second 2 bullet points? And, what would happen if the sentence were split into 2? Did anyone try that, or see a spot where, what would happen if I put a period here? And it's perfectly okay either way. Again, no right or wrong. Okay. What I think is important is that this is helping you, these activities are helping you consciously look at the way your ideas flow together. And that is the main point. And so you want to keep along that kind of trajectory. So I kept mentioning prepositions. So here's an example. And this kind of speaks to what you were talking about, Kamale. Prepositions also create relationships like time, location, spatial relationships, something is above or below or under or whatever, and other kinds of relationships. That's what prepositions do. They can't necessarily be defined on their own, but you can look at the relationships they create. So, however, you can overuse them. Okay. And here's overused prepositions and other kinds of transitional words like however, a conjunctive adverb, another. For each exam, okay, there's a prepositional phrase starting with for. For each exam, however, I had 6 questions to choose from, although I wasn't given the questions in advance. However, since each one was based on one of the categories from my list, I did have an idea what they might address. So this sentence now becomes clearer if some of these transitional devices and prepositional phrases either get rearranged or removed. So sometimes you might have a sentence that, like Erin, you were saying, seems irredeemable, but then if you play around with it and just pull out some parts of it and rearrange others, it's redeemed quite nicely. The clearer version, notice, is also still 2 sentences, but look at the way they're connected now. Here we have a much longer dependent clause, starting with the preposition although. Although I wasn't given the questions in advance, comma, I had 6 questions to choose from for each exam. Since each was based on one category from my list, comma, I had an idea what they might address. So part of it is some of the repetitive stuff is pulled out. We don't need it all, but a lot of things are just rearranged and kind of streamlined. So you're still using the transitional devices that you need, but you're not overusing. Okay, so this can be something, and again, what you can do is look up online lists of prepositions and you'll find all sorts, and just download one and keep it handy so you can, and ideally you'll find a list of prepositions that you can have as a quick reference, but you might also find a list of prepositions that are followed by what they do, the relationships they create, what they show. So those can be handy devices to have. Oh, and David, I don't know if you put the RP PDF in, the relative pronoun PDF, but if you want to slip that in. So I was talking about relative pronouns, which and that. I found a fun handout and it's very colorful and I love it. I just geek out over it, but it's a fun little PDF page that just kind of shows the relative pronouns which and that and how they're used. So David's putting that in the chat, and if you download that PDF also, you'll get a sense of, you can use it as a resource. All right, I did mention old and new information. This Kamila, if you use a lot of introductory clauses and phrases, one thing you can ask yourself is, are all of these connecting bits, or am I introducing new information at the beginning of a sentence and then ending the sentence with older information so my readers might actually forget the newer, more important stuff? And you may not be doing that. It's just, if you use a lot of introductory phrases and clauses, that can be a pattern to consider, right? So anything complex, complicated phrases and clauses, new information, and technical terms are often easier for your readers to process when they're placed at the end of a sentence, because we tend to remember best what the most recent thing we heard or read or saw. So if it's at the end of a sentence, it's more recent than what was at the beginning. Context and framing help the reader. So at the beginning of the sentence, some of that connecting information can help create a context or frame this new information. So that helps us get there. So here's some, an example. In this first one, the new information is potentially at the beginning of the sentence. Questions about the ethics of withdrawing intravenous feeding. Okay, so it's about intravenous feeding and withdrawing, are the most difficult to resolve. Here's the context: difficulty in resolving these questions. Okay, so by the time we get here, we remember this idea of something's difficult to resolve, but it's a little more distant what that thing is. So if we flip it with the older stuff that sets up context first and end with the newer stuff, we get the overall context and the newer information more recently. Both of those things, the context and the placement of the new information, help us remember and internalize that newer information more easily. The most difficult questions to resolve are context, that's our context, are about the ethics of withdrawing intravenous feeding. So in this case, we're introducing a new idea, the ethics around withdrawing intravenous feeding. But we're giving our readers a context first by which to think about this particular set of ethics. Does that make sense? So it's not that either sentence is totally incomprehensible. They're both comprehensible. But what your readers will find in what you might find it, like if you have trouble reading, and this can include published materials, if you have trouble reading and internalizing something, pay attention to where the writer is introducing new versus old or contextualizing information. And you might find that the more troublesome pieces of writing, including, like I said, some published writing, have a lot of new information placed earlier before context for how to think about it is introduced. Okay, so, you can think about, okay, so for my readers, how am I placing this information? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Any questions so far about any of this?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So this applies at the sentence level, but not at a paragraph level, correct?
Why? No, not necessarily. At a paragraph level, you also want to be thinking about where is the info. Like, remember what Kamala was saying, that she had all this cool information, but then realized some very crucial information was missing. And if she waited too long to introduce it, about pre-Christian Hawaiian marriage traditions, if she waited too long to introduce that information, the readers either had no context if it's being used contextually, or just didn't have some of the new information they needed to make a comparison. So you do want to consider this at a broader scale too. That being said, sometimes, like definitions of terms, right? You're putting those early in a document, but you're contextualizing them by telling your reader, okay, I'm going to give you some definitions of some of the major terminology concepts I'll be using. So you're still contextualizing them on a sentence level, and this information becomes old information as your reader moves through the paper and applies it. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Any other questions? These are great questions you guys are asking. Great points you're bringing up. Okay. How can you practice fluency in your writing? Well, obviously, we've been doing some of that. So just to kind of recap, again, here's something you can do. Read through a selection of your own writing and just kind of try doing some of what we did. Identify problem areas that can be fixed following these tips for fluency. Okay, so for instance, look for conjunctive adverbs. Are they doing their jobs? Are they connecting ideas logically, creating effective shifts between ideas? Are they punctuated accurately? Look for conjunctions, the fanboys. Are they creating effective shifts between ideas? Are they punctuated accurately? And then identify places where ideas shift abruptly. What potential transitional words, clauses, phrases, and or punctuation can you use to connect these ideas smoothly and logically? And then another thing you can do is simply experiment with transitions. Challenge yourself to use the non-defining relative pronoun, which it will add more information, but it's set off, the clause it creates is set off by commas, and they can literally be lifted out of the sentence, and grammatically, the sentence would still be complete. The idea might not really be totally helpful, but the sentence itself is grammatically complete. Or challenge yourself to use that, which is a defining relative pronoun, to connect ideas more fluidly. Is there a noun or an idea that you can follow with this defining relative pronoun? Same with challenge yourself to add a new conjunctive adverb or conjunction with the appropriate punctuation to connect ideas more fluidly. Okay, so we are coming to the end. So what I would suggest is maybe we've done some of this already, but maybe take just a couple minutes to do one of these either review and reflect activities or strategies, or experimenting with transition strategies. Maybe take a minute, grab the same paragraph or a new one, and see if I can do any of these things with it. Okay. So I know this was kind of brief, and it does take time. We have to kind of think about it. So, but did anyone find one thing that they experimented with a little bit, or that they identified as doing or not doing its intended job? Erin, if you're chomping at the bit to say something, it's perfectly fine. If you're not, no worries.
I always am. That's my tendency as a
not a
student.
problem. I'm the same way.
I've been staring at my problem paragraph, and I decided to apply what we just recently talked about, which is this logic setup. So I had a problematic, I suppose, dependent clause. And it was at the end of the sentence, and by moving it to the beginning, it actually sets it up a little bit better. It's still not a great sentence.
Still some issues, but yeah.
But it improved. So that would be a logical improvement. I have to go and learn more about comma splices. That's going to be my homework after this workshop. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you are so welcome. There are some great resources, and I can't remember, but I think have you guys heard of the kind of the grammar and other videos called Socratica? I'll put that in. I'm going to, I'm not, it's the name of, if you go on to YouTube and just say Socratica, try comma splices or comma splice or whatever. I just put it in chat. And if that doesn't work, Socratic relative pronoun, or, just try a few things and see what comes up. But they're very short. These are very short videos, and they go right to the point of one thing. That's why I like them. So maybe start with that, Erin. See if you can find, and I subscribe to Socratica because I find it really helpful. She just, boom, 3 minutes and you're done. It's like, oh, okay, I think I get it. If there's anything that seems to contradict what we talked about, feel free to, I'll put my email in chat. Feel free to send me a quick email. It's perfectly fine if you're not in the College of Nursing, because, if you need to check, that's ldupont@email.arizona.edu. So if you find something online, but it doesn't seem to quite fit with what we were talking about, just reach out to me, and that's fine. So I think we've already built this discussion in throughout the workshop, so I'm not worried about forcing us in the last 30 seconds to have yet another large group discussion. Before we end for the night, is there anything anyone else wants to, any other point you want to make, or pattern you noticed, or something else, a question you have?
I have a question.
Yeah, come on in. Yeah.
I've been thinking throughout the course of attending these workshops that it's like I'm definitely taking good notes, and feeling like in the course of doing the exercises, especially, I'm understanding the concepts a lot better. But
Great.
I feel like when it comes time to actually do revisions, especially there's such a high volume of information that you've given us, and the other presenters in the past have given us about different ways to think about even just the micro level, what
Yes.
you're trying to do with each sentence and idea, and et cetera. And for me, I've just been feeling a little bit overwhelmed with how much there is. Yeah. So I was wondering if you know of maybe
I do.
a resource, or a little guide of questions. Yeah, that list of questions that you gave us earlier, it's questions that I can ask myself as I'm looking at any certain paragraph, that I can just refer. And I'm sure as I get into revising a lot more regularly, I'll be honest with you, I've never really revised. This is what I realized through attending these things. I've never revised. I've always just done. So yeah, this is, I would like to have something that I could that could guide me through it on a daily basis, as I'm going through, at least at first, while I'm trying to get used to what I'm watching out for.
So I have a couple of suggestions. One is, always, when you're on a learning curve, choose 3 things to focus on, and make those your goals for the next month or whatever. When I'm revising on a sentence level, I'm going to focus on transition words and colons and prepositions, where they're used, identifying them and seeing if there are any patterns. And you can even narrow that down further. Or I'll pick conjunctive adverbs, again, however, therefore, and just think about, are they punctuated correctly, blah, 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 doing their job. And then redundant pairs from the previous workshop, where I'm saying the same thing in 2 different words or 2 different phrases, and one other pattern on a sentence level. Okay, so if you pick at this micro level just 2 or 3 things to focus on when you're starting out, that can be helpful. It's frustrating sometimes because you're missing some things, and you start going, oh, but think about it this way: you weren't doing it at all before, right? So you're catching a lot more than you would have been otherwise. And then as you internalize that, it becomes old information, and you can go on to 2 or 3 new patterns on a micro level. On a more macro level, again, focus on one thing at a time when you're revising. For instance, start with organization and try one strategy of using different color highlighters or the highlighting function in Word or whatever. And anything related to one particular idea, highlight it in just that one color. And then do the same thing with different ideas. And I've brought this up before, Kamala, and possibly in other workshops you've attended here. But if you just try that one strategy, you can very quickly see where like a color may hang together, which means the related information to that topic is all, pretty much pulled together, or scattered all through the draft or a section or whatever, which might indicate you need to pull it together or expand content to flesh it out. Online, another suggestion is there are checklists that you can use. I haven't come up with or found one that's the best or worst, but I've seen several that, in fact, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because I just was looking at one the other day. Let me see if I bookmarked it, I think. Let me see if I can find it. This will be a minor miracle, but let me see if I can find it. This screen. So this is a reading strategy self-assessment. And one thing to consider is how we read can also affect the fluency of our own writing. So what we comprehend and the reading that we look, the text that we look at and how we think about it. But also, this gives you an idea of a kind of checklist, and then there are clickable downloads here that you can use. And then if you just, let me see, writing, or let me do this, revision checklists. Let's just, and then let's say higher education. Excelsior OWL is fabulous. Not all checklists are best. So is the Writing Center at UNC. So the first two that come up. Now, this is a bit much. It's not really a checklist. It's just a whole bunch of overwhelming questions. But if you look down here, there's a printable and interactive checklist. So let's pull it up. Now we get, so we've got these awesome questions and we can check the ones that we've done and then go back. If time is a problem, again, just choose a few things, 3 or 4 things to focus on, and don't worry about the rest at that moment, okay? You want to be able to chunk it down and make it digestible. It's like you wouldn't try to swallow an entire plate of food in one setting because your body wouldn't know what to do with it, so it would heave it all up again. So to extend this disgusting metaphor a little bit. So if you take a little bit at a time from the plate, you start to figure out how the flavors blend together. You get a sense of how hungry you are, how much you need to take in, and so forth. So it's the same with revising. Focus on little bits at a time. So here's one. So let me get you these 2 links because all right. So copy link address, put that in chat. And then I'm going to copy the UNC one. I haven't looked at it, but I love they have a lot of cool things. And I'm going to put one more thing in here too. Just do a search for the punctuation guide online. And that it's a blazing yellow screen. In fact, if I just do punctuation guide, I can give you the link. Copy. That's it. And you'll see that what it gives you is, oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Oh, yeah, I am. it shows you what the punctuation mark looks like. This can be helpful with things like semicolons and colons. We forget the different kinds of dashes and how they differ from hyphens. And then you can look it up by clicking on it and find out really what is it used for. Okay. So this, and then you've got punctuation up here that you can click on too. So this is like one of my all-time favorite resources. So again,
that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And again, feel free to drop me a quick email if you have a question come up, or if you find a resource that you want us to share with the rest of the group. So we went over, but I appreciate your questions. It was, I'm sorry if I kept you from anything, but I think these were well worth it. Your questions well worth taking a few minutes to address. And it was delightful to talk with you. And I look forward to either hearing from you or just kind of getting a sense of how things go occasionally. Maybe I'll see you in future workshops.